seek no special favors, but certainly we have a right to expect justice and equal protection of laws, even for the humblest Negro. Shall we be disappointed again? Respectfully yours, Harry T. Moore. That letter was written by local NAACP president and civil rights activist Harry Moore in November of 1951. The intent of that letter, which was written to Florida Governor Fuller Warren, was to spark an investigation into Lake County Sheriff Willis McCall, who had recently shot 2 black men. Many believe that the sheriff's actions were tantamount to a planned execution. Several weeks later, on Christmas night, a bomb made from sticks of dynamite was detonated beneath the Moore home. The resulting blast would take Harry's life and his wife Harriet's life several days later. Folks, I'm standing on the exact site where the dynamite bomb was detonated on the night of December 25th, 1951. Here at the Harry Moore Center, the home, though it's built to specifications, is actually facing differently. That's to complement the center. In actuality, the house would have been facing this way, and I'm standing exactly on the spot where the bomb went off. And this would have been the Moore's bedroom right here. If we look this way to the west, approximately where that red Jeep is where the orange grove was, where the killers were laying in wait for the Moore family to come home from their Christmas celebration. So when the Moores went to bed and they extinguished the lights in their home, the killer came over, crawled up under the crawl space, and lit the dynamite bomb, and then took off.
Good morning, and welcome to Southern Discomfort. This episode is going to be about Harry T. Moore and Harriet Moore, 2 civil rights activists that were brutally murdered on December 25th, 1951 at 10 o'clock p.m. We're actually sitting on the steps of a exact replica of the home that was destroyed on that infamous night. We're going to discuss with you today on this episode what happened, who Harry T. Moore was, and our theory on the bombing itself. I'm your host, Bobby Caruso, with my all-time partner, Bob Walker. As you know, we have extensive years in law enforcement to include homicide investigations. This is our take on what happened on that infamous night.
I'm with the Cultural Center historian, Ms. Karshanda Wright. She's about to give us a tour of the Harry Moore crime scene home.
Welcome to the Harry T. and Harriet B. Moore replica home, built in 2009. The home is a replica of the exact size of the Moore's home. So everything inside we got from the Moore's daughter, Juanita Evangeline Moore, who we affectionately call Miss Evangeline, or Van. So as you can see, the home is set up just as it would have been in 1951 for Christmas. Everything is as true as we could get to that time period. And we have the Moore's bedroom being the first bedroom that you see. It is the only room in the home that actually has a closet. Most people still use wardrobes back then. You can see that it's decorated very nicely for Christmas. And this is the children's bedroom where their oldest daughter, Annie Rosalia, would have been sleeping in the bed with the white bedspread. Normally, she would have slept in the bed with the green bedspread. However, her sister was not here, and she missed her so much she slept in her bed, and that really saved her life. And then we have the back bedroom that it passes the linen closet and the bathroom to the mother's, where his mother, Annie Rosa, Rosa, as they called her, Rosa Moore, was actually sleeping. And she heard footsteps and said, Harry, is that you? And that's when the bomb went off. And her proximity is why she didn't get injured as much as she would have if she were closer to the bombing.
So ma'am, you said prior to this that this is what's known in the South as a shotgun shack. Can you describe a shotgun shack?
So a shotgun style home is a house where the front door and the back door line up. So if you shot a gun through that home, you would hit straight out of the back door and not hit anything. All the homes were usually on either side, depending on which way it was laid out. And so that's why it was called a shotgun shack. It was mostly purchased at the Sears catalog, and they had several ways that you could purchase it. Some were actually built by people who could not purchase those homes by using leftover pieces from other homes.
So a shotgun shack, I could fire a gun from the back door and hit a bad guy at the front door.
Yes,
And all the rooms are to one side.
definitely.
Very good. And this was the daughter's bedroom.
Yes,
And the one daughter usually slept there, but decided to sleep here on the night in question.
yes,
And the proximity, the distance away probably saved her life a little
Yes.
less, correct? Okay.
So I lit a stogie, and I'm going to sit here and tell you a theory on the bombing of Harry and Harriet T. Moore's home. I'm sitting here on the stoop of the replica of the home, even though, as Bob told you earlier, the house was in a different positioning. But I'm going to reenact what Bob and I feels is what happened. Now, I phoned a friend and spoke to an expert. He's an EOD technician, retired from the Air Force, served around the world. I let him look at some of the pictures, and he gave me his expert opinion on the photos. Now, there's not many photos inside the home that Bob and I could come up with. So by the debris on the outside of the home, my dear friend was able to come up with his theory. He's also a college professor and teaches explosives. So here's our theory. The bomb that went off would have been underneath the home, located under the crawl space. That is Harry and Harriet T. Moore's bedroom where the explosion went off. Now, from the debris, from the photos, and we will add some of the photos in on our podcast. The explosion took place, and you can see the debris from about the corner of the roof to about the front door. The debris was laying in that portion of the home. Nowhere else. Not in the back of the home, not on that side of the home where the living room is. Just that area. It's the opinion of former investigators that dynamite was used because of the suspects and their accessibility to dynamite, working in the fields, and so on and so forth. So we do believe that dynamite was used. Although, the expert said he didn't believe it was a heavy charge. Maybe 3 sticks, maybe 4 sticks, because of the damage was isolated to one area. Okay, so from where I'm standing, or sitting I should say, back to the end of the porch is where the damage was focused on. Now the fuse is about 40 seconds before it goes off, okay? 40 seconds an inch before it goes off. The explosion is in a 360 degree, not in an upward or just an outward motion. So keep that in mind, 360 degrees right there. When the explosion went off, would have pinned either Harry or Harriet up against the wall because of the 360 outward blast. Now, as we know, Harry was standing up in the doorway. His mom was in the back room. She heard rustling or heard noises or voices. Thought it was Harry, called out to Harry, "Harry, is that you?" Harry gets out of bed with Harriet. He stands in the doorway. The explosion goes off. He takes the brunt of it. Harriet gets thrown up, and the mattress pins her against the wall, which probably kept her alive a lot longer than anticipated. Unfortunately, Harry died sooner because he took the majority of the blast. So we're talking about a wooden structure home, splintering of the wood flying, and the impact of the bomb itself. No one else in the house was injured. No one in the house was killed. It was his daughter and his mom in the back bedrooms. I can't show you or tell you about the inside of the home because, as I stated before, there really isn't a lot of pictures of the inside of the home. Now, we know the daughter came running up and she actually fell through the floor when she was checking on her dad and her mom, because the bedroom, after the explosion, left a gaping hole where the bed and Harry and Harriet was. She fell through the hole, didn't die, didn't receive too many injuries. That's what the explosion did. Now, if they would have placed the explosives underneath the front porch, in that 360 blast of the amount of dynamite they used, I'm thinking, and the experts thinking, that Harriet probably would have been saved. Harry still probably would have taken the brunt of it, because you remember now, he was standing in the doorway. There's theories on that. He was standing in the doorway, he wasn't standing in the doorway. Bob and I's theories was he was standing in the doorway because of the circumstances of the mother calling his name. The experts, I didn't even go in through the story with him, and he said the individual was standing in the doorway or a close proximity. That's the bombing. That's what occurred. I'm going to show you how we perceive this happen. So why am I smoking a cigar? Because with the fuse, it had to be lit. Could have been an old Zippo lighter. It could have been a cigarette. It could have been a cigar. But with this, is completely lit all the time, or like a cigarette. If it were I would use a cigar or a cigarette instead of lighting the Zippo or a match with that sudden flare, just in case somebody was up and could have seen it. So Bob, if you would, walk with me and let me show where the bomb was placed and went off.
And folks, this is a wheelchair access ramp that was added by the center, so, this was not here back in 1951.
Bedroom. Here's your crawl space. Now, I'll get down and show you. I don't want to destroy the face. They have beautiful shrubbery, so I'm not going to move it and crawl actually underneath there. But here we go. Have my light. I'm going to crawl underneath here, underneath the space. I'm going to place the sticks of dynamite. Got my fuse. Going to light the fuse. And then I'm going to haul it. I'm going to haul back to the orange groves. By the time I'm going back to the orange groves, the explosion's already going to happen. I will be out of the impact zone. The only thing I don't know, and I can't tell you, is how long the fuse was. We'll try to narrow that down maybe a little later on. I'll call a friend again and see what he believes was the length of the fuse. So, our listening public and fans, that is our take on how the explosion was set, detonated, and the demise of the Moore family. Okay, I'm standing in the bedroom where Harry T. and Harriet Moore, during December 25th, were sleeping when the explosion went off. So our theory, and theory of a bomb expert that I had made reference to earlier, was that Harry Moore was standing up. So now remember, 360-degree pattern of explosion. If he was standing, we figure he was probably standing about here, answering his mom, who was down the hallway, when she called out to him and wanted to know, Harry, is that you? She probably heard commotion outside. So if he's standing here, and I told you where the bomb was located, right outside those two windows underneath, he would have taken the brunt of the explosion. Now, as our theory was, and the theory of the bomb expert was, the mattress pinned her up against the wall, which saved her life for a while. Unfortunately, she met her demise. If Harry was in the bed with her, that mattress would have taken some of the impact of the explosion. But I'm standing where we believe this all occurred.
The daughter mentions, I believe it was Peaches, that after the blast, she stepped into the room, and as she's stepping in, her foot goes right through the floorboard.
Which makes sense. The explosion was right underneath here.
Right.
Which would have taken it. It's an all wooden home. The explosion would have caused buckling, which we've seen on the outside, but the buckling to the home is only in the front area and here.
So,
besides splintering, naturally she came in here. There must have been a gaping hole or two or three, and makes sense that she fell through.
Harry was basically killed by the shrapnel created by the floor.
Yes, some of the impact, remember you have that impact too from the dynamite, but the amount of shrapnel and wooden spears, almost, that have splinted from the floor, splinted from that wall, probably met his demise out.
I'm also wondering, and not being an expert on dynamite, if the flipping mattress may have contributed to saving the daughter's life.
Could have, absolutely. Remember, our expert says that it wasn't a heavy charge,
Right.
Because the damage was isolated right here. If it was a heavier charge, we would have been looking at the adjoining bedroom and so on and so forth. And the living room is pretty much still intact. Unfortunately, we don't have photos of the inside of the house for whatever reason, but we're talking 1951 when this investigation first started. They may have not went in the house at all.
As you can see, this house is preserved to the era of 1951, from the old radio, the typewriter, to the settee, sewing machine, the Victrola is very perfectly preserved. I was at the Lorraine Hotel back in 2017 when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And this place is every bit as professional and well done as Lorraine Hotel. And as we turn, we can see a lot of photographs on the walls that demark a lot of Harry's past, his youth, and some of his friends. And one of them was Thurgood Marshall, the Supreme Court Justice, who actually stayed in this house. He was close friends with Harry. And I'm going to let Ms. Karshanda go into that.
So yes, in 1934, when Mr. Moore opened the first NAACP chapter here in Brevard County, he was introduced to Thurgood Marshall. In Mr. Marshall, Harry and him were very kindred spirits. He could see that Harry would be his eyes and ears in the South, looking for cases that would be landmark. And so he actually came and stayed at Mr. Moore's house several times in the guest bedroom where his mother was sleeping that night. Their relationship continued, and when Mr. Moore died, he actually grieved 2 weeks with the family at the death of Mr. Moore.
And just to the left of that is the tombstone of Willie J. Howard, who was a famous lynching victim back in the 40s. Harry was involved in that case a little bit. We're probably going to do a future episode on that because that is quite the story. And just to the left is the infamous Willis McCall, the Lake County Sheriff, who may or may not have had a hand in Harry's demise. The evidence, there seems to be some evidence in both directions, but as we said, the case is still open, and was last opened in the year 2008, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. Because it's so hot and so humid outside, we're starting to wilt. We decided to bring this inside so we could get a better interview with Ms. Karshanda. And one of the things we were wondering about, Bobby and myself, was the investigation into Harry Moore was reopened in 2008.
Yes.
We know the case was never solved. We know no arrests were ever made, but there were suspects.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what happened after the investigation was reopened in '08?
So when we were here in '08, there was a full-scale investigation. They even combed the grounds again. They did everything as if this was a fresh case. So when we were talking about the case, because they had two FBI guys here, one of them actually had been here the first time. So
From
he was a
51?
consultant. He just was calling on the phone. He wasn't actually part of the investigation. And he was an older guy. He would call, check on the two guys who were actually here. So he's actually in a movie about Mr. Moore too. So it was really interesting to have someone who was here from the original case to actually want to talk about what happened with the guys who were investigating it in 2008.
Right.
So what we found out from that was we had FBI files, and then we got new FBI files, of course. So we have two sets of FBI files in our room. And when we were talking about the discussion about who actually was involved in the bombing of the Moore house, names kept coming up, and that's when we started listening, because you want to know what happened, because I work here and I want to give people the accurate information. So the first thing that they talked about was Cox, and Cox actually was running for bookkeeper in Lake County, even though he lived in Orange County. Now Cox was
Edward Cox, is that his name?
no, that's Joseph Cox.
Joseph Cox, okay.
So Edward is the Spivey, and it's Edward Spivey and his brother Perry. So Cox was in possession of a rudimentary map of the Moore's home.
Right.
So they say, as according to the FBI files. But he actually killed himself in 1952 after being questioned by the FBI. He borrowed a gun from his neighbor, dug a grave in his backyard, and shot himself. So that just meant, according to the FBI files, is that he had a lot of knowledge of what happened. And he didn't, so he doesn't want his family to be in danger. He doesn't want anyone else to get endangered by this, so he kills himself. And then, of course, we had Edward and Perry Spivey. Now, Edward Spivey is described as a lush, which I laugh because, it's Christmas season at the time that they're committing this crime. So just imagine what a lush is doing during Christmas time. They're doing a little heavy drinking. So he actually implored his younger brother, Perry Spivey, to help him bring the bomb to where it was supposed to be delivered to. That's what they are claiming in the FBI files. So his brother and he delivered the bomb to whomever they're supposed to deliver it to, which we believe is Belvin and Brooklyn. Now, Belvin and Brooklyn have been kicked out of other clans for being such renegades.
What was Brooklyn's for? Earl Brooklyn?
Yes.
Okay.
So Brooklyn and Belvin have been kicked out of other clans for being really renegades. They had really radical things that they'd done. And so if you were going to use somebody to commit something that had never been done before, these would be the two people you would use, okay? So the FBI report says that the two gentlemen were sitting in the orange grove smoking cigarette after cigarette, waiting for the moment when they could light the bomb. So I do believe that much because they had a pile of cigarettes, okay? Cigarette butts. So you think, okay, and it's pitch black in an orange grove. It's real 4 acres between you and your next neighbor. So I do believe that's what happened.
And we were discussing earlier, Harry's home was burglarized about a month before his murder.
Yes.
And his shotgun was missing from the home. Bobby and I were wondering, prior to even coming down here, how did the killer know how to put a bomb under their bedroom? How would he know where the bedroom was?
Well, that's where Cox came in with the rudimentary map of the Moore's house. So they had already came in, stolen the gun, and then they probably drew that rudimentary map to help them be able to understand the logistics of the home and how it was laid out and everything that they would need to do in order to be able to place the bomb where they did.
So besides Mr. Moore's shotgun, do you recall, or is there any evidence that anything else was taken out of the home?
No, just the weapons.
Just the weapons.
Just the weapons. I think that was the attempt to make sure that he couldn't protect himself
Absolutely.
before they, in case he woke up
Absolutely.
or they got caught, he wouldn't be able to shoot them. But they were unaware that he already carried a pistol with him. So maybe that's the irony in the situation. He carried a pistol everywhere he went in his glove compartment, and he always would say, they might get me, but I'm gonna take a couple of them with me, So he was very aware that he was placing his life in danger, and he was very aware of what could happen, but he was going to go forward anyway. He says, I laid my life on the altar, which is true. He knew what could happen. He knew what could occur, and it did eventually happen, but not before he had done so much that it was like lighting a spark, and then it just kept carrying on after his death. Because once you introduce an idea into the world, you cannot take it back. It's one of those things that you just can't do.
So wasn't there a couple of kids out parking that described
Yes.
2 of the suspects?
So there were 4 kids who were supposed to be at the movies who decided to park instead. And parking is like when you sit in the car and you and your significant other at the time, boyfriend, beau, whatever you want to call them, are kissing.
That's more fun than a movie.
Maybe some heavy petting. I don't know. But they were parking, and they were interrupted by 2 gentlemen running down the street. And so they looked up, and there, sure enough, they could tell that it was one that was kind of tall and thinnish, and one that was kind of short and portly. And that is how they described the whole situation. And so that is exactly how the police were able to kind of pinpoint who might have been the 2 gentlemen that they were trying to describe.
And ultimately, there is a deathbed confession by one of the individuals.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's where Edward Spivey comes into play. So Edward Spivey, who was the drinker, as I told you, his brother actually got killed 2 weeks after the bombing in a car accident, which is very ironic, right? And so he began drinking very heavily, and he was institutionalized for being an alcoholic. So I'm pretty sure that him and his deathbed confession was really just trying to clear his conscience of everything he had done in 78, which is when they reopened the second case, the case for the second time.
The Moore case was opened up on 3 occasions, 1978 being the first, 2000.
No, 51. Well,
51,
52.
It was
52.
active. Okay, 52, 78, and 2008.
Yes.
And the deathbed confession was known for a while before they made it public?
Yes, because they wanted to make sure that, people's reputations were on the line. There were people that he had spoke about that had passed away. People want to make sure that when they are putting something out there to the public, especially back then, your word is your bond. That's the kind of thing the 70s was, that they were putting out the truth as far as they can check. So they were fact checking everything that he was saying, and then everything was lining up, and they were like, well, this is what he's saying. It's kind of lining up. They couldn't talk to the people who he was talking about because they had all died. Really, after the bombing, Belvin died 9 months after the bombing of the Moore House from cancer, and Brooklyn died December 25th, 1952, a year to the date of the bombing of the Moore House. So when you're talking about the people who were directly involved, they believe, in the bombing of the Moore House, we're talking about people who didn't live more than a year out after, except for Mr. Spivey, who confessed.
Right.
So question, the Spivey's, Brooklyn, his associate, can we connect them directly or indirectly to Willis McCall?
So the only person who was directly connected to Mr. McCall would be Cox. And Cox killed himself right after being questioned by the FBI. And that would indicate that he didn't want anything more to be questioned. He didn't want any more information, and
Right.
the information that he had was critical to connecting everything together. So,
So I was told about Cox when I was with Lake County, with the Sheriff's Department. Told a lot about Willis McCall, and I had the honor to work for the only individual on the Sheriff's Department to stand up to Mr. McCall, and that was Evie Griffin, who I served under. Um, so I have a lot of the background story, and I believe we're going to do an episode just on Willis McCall to back up some of our theories from here as well. But I didn't know if anybody else had any direct link to McCall. I mean, he had long, long arms. It wasn't just Lake County.
no, he definitely was wielding his power within the whole state of Florida because they hunted down with the Groveland 4 Ernest Thomas,
Uh,
which was outside of his jurisdiction, but nobody seemed to even think about the fact that he shot him outside of his jurisdiction and he was justified in it.
Willis McCall was involved in a lot of deaths. It was he tried to control the gambling out of Lake County.
Bolito.
One of the people who opposed him was a female,
That's
and
correct.
she was thrown from the roof of a 4-story building. I think towards the end of his career, he kicked a inmate to death in a cell. So this guy was, he was involved in a lot of deaths.
Absolutely. And not to get into the Willis McCall story, because we're going to do an episode on that, is the legend goes that he wore some gold teeth on his pocket watch fob that belonged to the inmate he kicked in the face and killed. Now, it was confirmed by the old timers that worked in Lake County. They said, oh yes, he did this, he did that. Some of the books, it mentions it. I can't tell you if it's 100% fact or not, but I can tell you that as a result of that beating you're discussing, they say that the gold teeth or gold tooth on his watch fob was from him.
And from what I've understood through research, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because the next election he was voted out. I think that was in 1972. But,
it's the connections with political leaders, the connections with the KKK makes this web more tangled as far as the Moore case goes than anything. Because I mean, if you really, really wanted to start pulling away the spider webs, there's just so you could. Oh, then you have this individual involved. You got this individual involved. Well, it happened because he sent a letter to the governor at the time because he wanted an investigation open on McCall, and then just like that, we had the bombing. And in that day, especially if you worked on a farm, getting dynamite to clear land and explosives, and it were readily available, you can go to the feed store and pick up stuff. So it's not like it was very rudimentary what they did. It wasn't like they put together some C4 or some other type of explosive. It's pretty cut and dry. I mean, a couple sticks of dynamite, put in the fuse, walk away, bundle of cigar butts, because that always stays lit. Doesn't give off a little bit of a glow when you stand it underneath the on the house. So as that aspect goes, you can connect the dots, and I'm pretty sure if we look further and started trying to connect more dots from where Cox, as the story goes, and as she confirmed, was running for office at the time. The deal was, nobody positive asante would get the election if he did his bidding. That's how the story goes.
well, the thing about the Harry Moore case, the deeper you dive into it, the worse it gets.
Oh, absolutely.
When Harry was murdered, a lot of people don't know, the governor sent a special investigator here to investigate the bombing, and the investigator was a member of the Georgia Ku Klux Klan that no one knew about. So you had the Klan investigating the Klan.
Absolutely. You know what I find interesting as well, Bob, is so Harry gets sent to the first hospital. Can you tell me what happens?
So Harry isn't really going to go to an ambulance to the hospital. I mean, this is rural Brevard County. There is no one that's going to come pick him up. He has to be placed in a personal vehicle and taken down a 2-lane dirt highway over 3 wooden bridges to Sanford. The hospital where Dr. Starks was waiting, they called. He knew what was going to happen. So when Harry got there, he was non-responsive. The women were so hysterical. They didn't want to get checked out until they did something for him. So, they gave him a shot, but he was pretty much dead on arrival. And that's the thing about the whole scenario. Not getting medical attention sooner, like if he would have gotten it sooner, he probably could have lived.
Right.
But because of the arduous journey and, him not getting the attention that he would need on the way, that is probably what ensured that he was going to die.
And Harriet dies 9 days later.
Yes.
Was from an embolism in her lung, is that correct?
Yes.
That's probably from the concussion of the blast.
Absolutely. And if you think about the ride, right now, from where we're located, you go right out to 46 straight into Sanford. In the day, naturally with the wooden bridges and the rural road, I bet you it probably took over an hour and a half to get there from here, which normally would take you about 40 minutes, 45
Yes.
minutes.
And the cars didn't go that fast. I mean, just think about it.
No.
It's like 36, 40.
And who took him? Who actually took him?
His brother-in-law and his wife. So they drove them all the way there, and she was in. If you watch the PBS movie, she's in there, and she describes what happened, in great detail.
What's the name of the PBS movie?
A Man Before His Time.
A Man Before His Time. Okay. There's a book of that title as well.
Yeah.
Okay. To wrap things up.
Well, the PBS is Freedom Never Dies. The book is A Man Before His Time.
Okay, very good. I guess in closure, we just, one more question we had was, I talk to people, I say, we're looking into Harry Moore, we're doing the research on it, and people go, who? And we know, a lot of people know who Medgar Evers is, they know who Martin Luther King is, and Abernathy, those guys. Some of the guys who were killed, or Meredith, the one who was shot in Mississippi. But very few people know who Harry is, and we were wondering why that's the case, being that he's the first civil rights activist to be pioneer to be murdered on a national level.
Well, there's several reasons. Number one, is before television. So we only have stills and black and whites of Mr. Moore, and before television, it's not everything's not broadcast. But he was well known at his time period, because you have to remember that 5 different countries read about the bombing of the Moore House. The Russian consulate spoke out against it, and so did Eleanor Roosevelt. So even though we have lost this bit of history because of the way we transitioned from getting our history, getting our news from radio and telegraph and newspapers, to getting it now, it's on television, and it's happening right in your front room, wherever you live. That is probably where we lost the connection with Mr. Moore, because it was before television, and it's a time period where the transition from one way of getting news to another, you lose a lot of information or a lot of people because they didn't translate over. We don't have footage of Mr. Moore speaking. We don't have footage of Mr. Moore at all. All we have is still black and whites. And when it comes to trying to transition that over into television today, or even most people are getting their news off of the internet. So it's not like it was before. And we lose a lot of that great history and information in the transition over to a new form of receiving our news.
I just find it interesting that the case in general hasn't sparked any interest from more historians or law enforcement like ourselves that are retired. It's just, you get a handful of information, few books, a couple of documentary series, but there's no anything further to keep him alive, like Martin Luther King Day. You don't have a Harry T. Moore Day.
We actually do
When?
in Florida. So Senator Hugh Hill.
But it's not a national holiday.
No, it's not a national holiday. It's a Florida day. But Senator Hugh Hill has designated the second Saturday in December for the Moors.
Oh, very cool.
Okay.
Didn't know that.
So that's
Actually,
one
think of
thing.
a national holiday.
And then we are in the Smithsonian African American Museum. It's right next to Brown versus the Board of Education. And we are on the Civil Rights Trail. Now, Florida as a whole has kind of tried to stay away from that Civil Rights Trail issue, but we get it. Each center that wants to be on that trail has to individually apply, and there is a cost that comes with it, but we are on the trail. The Highway 46 that runs from Brevard County to Orange County is named after the Moors.
So is the courthouse.
So is the courthouse. There is a actual there's a post office in Cocoa that's named after Mr. Moore. We have this center. So it's slowly taking place.
Well,
and then-
localized.
localized. We also have people who are in works, Top Cat Productions, who are supposed to be working with Mario Van Peebles and other people to try to get a full-fledged film, about the whole situation. And then we also have another documentary that's supposed to be coming out about the Moors. So we're trying to get the information out as much as we can. It's just taking a little bit longer than we thought. We've reached a lot of people because we were in New York City public schools and college by Zoom. We've also been in Atlanta schools by Zoom, and also in Ohio.
Right.
So we've really been trying to get this information out there, one story at a time, one interview at a time, hoping that people will really get because this is the epicenter. This is where it all started. This is where he laid out the blueprint of how the civil rights movement was going to be successful. And because he laid out that blueprint, people were able to come behind him, follow the same blueprint that he laid out, and make changes within their state. And then the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. So we have to think about him as the person who said, hey, I'm going to show you how to do it. He picked up the torch, and other people just ran with it.
And we got to keep the past alive because we got to know where we're going in the future.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we were intrigued by this was no one's done a podcast that we know of or come out here and filmed anything. So this was like virgin territory for us. And
Yeah, we were excited in the beginning, especially, and if I could take a minute to absolutely thank you and your knowledge as a historian is incredible.
Absolutely.
But to thank the center for allowing Bob and I to come in and actually do a podcast from here. And as I know, the first podcast will be done from here, which is even cooler for Bob and I. So not only as retired law enforcement, but also as somewhat historians, we like to call ourselves. We're just ecstatic that you've taken the time out of your busy day. I know you have a Juneteenth celebration coming
Yes.
up, and you're constantly busy, but you took that time aside. And I just want to thank you from my heart and from Southern Discomfort. From this episode, believe it or not, we will be going to St. Augustine and doing the episode in Civil Rights in St. Augustine, and which is probably going to be one of my favorite episodes is when we tackle the Willis McCall case. But it all, if you look at the epicenter of where our civil rights cases are going, it starts here.
Yes.
We can't start in St. Augustine, you can't start in Lake County unless you start here. So
I think in summation of the Harry Moore case, is from looking at from a law enforcement standpoint, we're as close to the truth as we're ever going to get. Anybody that was even remotely involved, this case is 73 years old, even if someone was 18 or 19 at the time when they were involved in it, they'd be really old. So chances are really good that all the suspects are dead, and we've
Right.
pretty much got what we're going to have.
Absolutely. And like we said in the beginning, and our whole format on the show was we were going to dig up the past. Sometimes there's not actual people to discuss, and we'll go over the evidence like we have done with this case. But on behalf of Southern Discomfort and some of our sponsors I'd like to thank is New Addiction Tattoo. I'd like to thank Justin. I'd like to thank Kensley. I'd like to thank Trinity. I'd like to thank my cigar company for also helping out. And I'd like to thank the Moore Center and everyone here. If you'd like to sponsor the show and let us advertise for you, please, when you hit in the like buttons, let us know. We will advertise for you every show. But for us to preserve history and go any further, we're going to need your support. We know you're going to love the shows that are coming after this one. So on behalf of myself, my partner Bob, I'd like to say thank you, and make sure that you watch this episode and give us your feedback.
Well, I'd like to say thank you to you guys for coming out and telling the story. We want to make sure that we get this story out to everyone as possible, and I'm glad that you decided to choose this story to promote and go out and tell the world about. And I'm happy that I was able to help you be able to tell the story completely, because it's not lost on me that you could have spent your time somewhere else, but you chose to be here.
And we're honored to be here, and I thank you. If we stumble every once in a while, remember our motto, Bobby.
Nothing scripted. We just show up and wing it.
You'll be blessed. Make memories.
Yes.
I got nothing. Don't it look? Ain't got the time. I'm a weird turd in every. Laughing